What is the update now?
It's basically at a historic low, and it has taken a huge, in statistical terms, a huge fall, almost 20-point drop since the Dobbs decision. Wow. These decisions are only likely to further stimulate President Biden's base, frankly, and their frustration with the with the court. We've seen through this poll that there's been a very dramatic partisan divide on assessments of the court, with Republicans sky high before this decision, but after the Dobbs decision, and Democrats almost in single digits in terms of their confidence in the court.
Is there any way to tell how much of this has to do, and I'm sure that you're asking questions about the integrity of the court as well, but the view Americans have of the Supreme Court, not only because of the outcome of the rulings of this court, but also the multiple stories of Justices Thomas and Alito flying on jets, getting on yachts, going on boating trips with Republican donors. There's been a real question of credibility here as well. Is that playing out in these numbers?
Absolutely. It's really important, as you mentioned, Joe, to place these perceptions of the court in the larger context of a general perception of corruption and mismanagement at best in Washington by many Americans. This is not a partisan driven thing, although these issues tend to be very partisan. Perceptions of government in Washington in general and confidence in institutions of Washington have been low for years now. They've taken a very serious but slow decline. That being said, in terms of the nature of the court, the conservative versus liberal nature of the court, we did see after Dobbs a relative high in people describing this particular court as too conservative. It was over 40% of Americans said that just a few months ago, before any of these three really blockbuster decisions have dropped this week.
What can you tell us then, Mohamed, given all this data you have on how they felt in June of last year and how you know they're going to be feeling of June of this year, historic low, continues to be a historic low? How does this bode well as we gear up for an election of November of next year? Where do you see confidence potentially of the Supreme Court in June of 2024?
It's probably not heading in a great direction for the court, with the exception of, again, that Republican base. It's also at a time when we know that abortion and its importance in people's voting behavior is at a slightly elevated level since the Dobbs decision. Obviously, the outcome of the last election, many would argue, was impacted by a fervent reaction on the left to some of these decisions. So I think politically, what we're likely to see is the folks who are most likely to vote for President Biden on the left getting a little bit more energy from these decisions. That being said, there's very little appetite for expanding the court. We saw President Biden make a very hard left turn on that idea recently. And Americans are generally, again, seeing these decisions from a very news-focused lens. The Dobbs decision was very unpopular. Over 6 in 10 Americans didn't want to see Roe v. Wade overturned. Affirmative action is a little bit more complex, and I'd love to unpack that for you if we have time.
Well, I want to just put this in context for a little bit here. 27% sounds awfully low. I'm guessing, Mohamed, that Congress would make that look good. Maybe those of us working in the news media would make that look good. How about Joe Biden? Approval ratings have been scraping the bottom for a long time. Where is he?
Absolutely. Right now, he's at 43% approval. That's a relative jump, but it's a jump from his numeric low. He was at the lowest point of his whole trend when he announced that he's running for re-election. But it's such an important point, Joe, about Congress. The only institution that has a worse rating than the Supreme Court is the one across the street, and that's Congress.
Amazing.
Oh, well, that's kind of challenging for the American public and as we gear up for a next election. And I wonder if concerns about the president as well is also going to get worse, given, especially this week, there's been renewed concerns about his age. You mentioned affirmative action. What are you seeing in the data on that?
Absolutely. Affirmative action is tricky because it depends on how you ask the question. When you frame it in the context of historic wrongs and grievances and giving people opportunity for the future, there's pretty strong support for that here in the United States. Over 6 in 10 Americans support that kind of an initiative. But when you mention admissions factors or things that will allow people to get in or not get into a school, attitudes tend to change, and there's about a 20-point shift against those kinds of policies. That being said, it's pretty clear where people stand on affirmative action. And if they've been disappointed by this vote at the court, they're clearly going to, we've heard, and you've already covered on the passion in that, but there's a lot of passion on the other side of this as well. And I think it's important to see these social issues now reemerging, really from the 90s in some cases, back to the forefront of the minds of voters in these elections.
President Biden said yesterday that this was not a normal court. A lot of people have wondered what exactly he meant by that. Some would suggest that this is exactly the court that America bought for itself when it elected Donald Trump. What do you think?
Well, at Gallup, Joe, we work really hard to always remain partisan and neutral. But I will tell you, as somebody who is a recovering lawyer and victim of a legal education, it's a pretty big deal for one of the three powers of government to take that direct of a statement against a performance of another. So anybody with a legal background was definitely getting the goosebumps or heebie-jeebies when he said that. How that pans out into the future, I think, will matter more at the voting box and what voters are really going to be saying in these coming elections.
When you talk about what voters are going to be seeing, we do know that the Dobbs decision, voting down Roe v. Wade, had an impact on how voters decided to vote in the midterm elections. Do you think the decisions we're talking about today, student loan forgiveness, the LGBTQ decision today, the affirmative action decision yesterday, Mohamed, do you think that's going to get young people riled up and at the ballot box?
If the past equals the future, yes, it will. Today, over 7 in 10 Americans support the legality of same-gender marriage. It's been rising for years. It kind of plateaued this year, but a majority of Americans find themselves really on different sides of these issues with the Supreme Court just in these last few decisions. Now, that being said, certainly there are a lot of people in this country that are very pleased with these outcomes, and we see that in our data too. So it's easy to kind of focus on the side that is aggrieved, if you will, with these decisions currently, but only time will tell how these and other decisions pan out. Dobbs has really not only was on the wrong side of public opinion, if you will, with the decision, but it's really been reinflamed. That focus, that concern has remained elevated for folks who are adamant about abortion as a right, as an access, right access to women. That attitude has been only inflamed by state legislatures that have tried to curtail access to abortion. So whether it's transgender issues and participation in sports or other social issues that now are going to continue to come to the forefront, it really will impact how people are going to vote in this coming election. Absolutely.